This is the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. I'm excited here because this is really the first time that I'm having a guest on the show where I don't have a history or a background with the person. And so I'm really excited to see where a conversation can go and what we can create here. So Tom, welcome to the Chapter 3 Stigma podcast. Could you just start off telling us a bit about yourself?
Yes, my name's Tom. I am a licensed clinical social worker. Long story on how I got there. I was also in the military. Let's go back to the very beginning, 1819. And I became a member of the Navy SEAL community. I was a graduate of BUD/S Class 106, February 29th, 1980. 9 years later, I was discharged for drug use, and my world fell apart. And from that, I found my way back into meaning and purpose by working with young people. I started at an adolescent recovery facility, 13 to 17-year-olds, moved on to a Boys and Girls Club, which was 6 to 18-year-olds. And between those two groups, they taught me how to live life again with purpose and meaning. And because of that gift that they gave me, I have committed my life for the rest of the time I have on this earth to being there as an advocate for them. I have gotten back to school to attain, like I shared. I'm a clinical therapist. I have a nonprofit called Honor Bound Academy that is specifically built for 18, 19, 20-year-olds. It's a rite of passage. And I have written a book that right now brings me out to the world trying to share that there are problems and major issues with our youth today, and I'm trying to shine a light on it. And that's what brings me here to talk with you, sir, and share my story.
Really appreciate it, Tom. And one of the things, just kind of to note on your journey that I was really unaware about before entering into recovery was actually the amount of individuals that enter into recovery and then pursue a career in the clinical space and going to become therapists or counselors to return back the gift that they have been given. And I tell people as they look to start into their recovery journey, I think one of the difficult aspects of it is navigating the landscape of options. Like, what do I do? Do I need to go to rehab? Do I just find a counselor? Do I just go to AA? And one of the things I always encourage them, if they're able to be honest about their issue and they can declare like, yes, I'm struggling with alcohol or I am an alcoholic, I always encourage them, if you're going to find a counselor, try to find one that is in recovery themselves. The amount, and that's not to say or discredit anyone that has a degree or is helping people that is not a recovered alcoholic themselves. But the power that exists when you can look into someone's eyes and have them replay and reflect the agony and the struggle that you have been on is just immensely powerful. And so in my time entering into recovery, I specifically had two counselors who were recovered addicts and alcoholics themselves. And so, like, and in all honesty, like early on in recovery, you get this sense of like purpose and meaning and a drive and desire to potentially help. Like I could see going down that path at some point in my life. It's this weird state that you can get to, or I should say unexpected state where you can get to where the service to others becomes like critical and foundational to your identity. So kind of rewinding back, how old were you when you joined the Navy and started training towards becoming a Navy SEAL?
I was 19 years old.
Would you? Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Would you have classified?
We're figuring out how to make this work. So
Yeah. Exactly. Would you have classified yourself as an addict at 19 when you joined the Navy?
I started using at the age of 14, which was the experimental stage. And by 15, I did not acknowledge it. But looking back, I was an addict, not an alcoholic. I was an addict at that stage. And when I went into the military, I brought the addiction with me.
Mm-hmm. How did you manage that, going through such physical and emotional and mentally taxing training and having that inner turmoil and battle going on with the addiction?
The early stage, it wasn't like that for me. It was, I was living life large. I was enjoying it. The saying with the Navy SEAL is, and this is my belief, we're not made, we're born. The opportunity is for the individual goes through training and has all of that came with it, all in a package from birth. And at that stage, I had the physical ability, I had the mental acuity, I had the ability to address every challenge that was sent my way. And that was while I was still using, and it worked for a number of years until it caught up. And as it will with all of us, there's a date that comes due, and when that happens, you got to pay the piper.
Yeah. What does that look like? Like, were you hiding your drug use? Were you able to mask it as a part of like normal behavior for that age and for what you were doing in life?
No, at the end it wasn't. It was falling apart. There was no way to hide it. And in the end, it came down to I fell asleep and woke up 3 days later. And in the military, that's, unauthorized absence. And it all came out in the wash in that they gave me a urinalysis. I came up hot, and it was the second time in my career, and so there wasn't going to be a third time. I would say from 19 to 26, I had it and was able to maintain it. 26, 27, and 26, 27, it was starting to falter, and at 28, it wasn't. It was only a matter of time, and at 29, it came. So, 9 years and 6 months.
And if you don't mind sharing, what was your drug of choice?
Drug of choice was crystal meth, Budweiser, Sensimian, and Skull Long Cut Wintergreen.
And what was your role within the Navy SEALs?
I was a hospital corpsman, so I was the medic.
Okay. Do you feel like the medical knowledge and training? This is going to be a question that might be framed kind of oddly, but do you feel like the medical knowledge and training you got sort of gave you an edge to your substance use? Yeah,
because early on when it was set up that the command was going to have a urinalysis, they called the corpsman and said, "Get the bottles ready." And so you were calling me to say, "Get the bottles ready," and I was making sure everybody knew, get somebody that's not hot to pee in your bottle and give it up
Yep.
and take care of it. And that only lasted for so long.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. I recall, so my wife is a pharmacist, and I remember sitting at her graduation, her doctorate graduation, and there was a gentleman behind me. I didn't know him. He was a grandfather of one of the graduates. And he leaned over to his wife and he said something that I'll never forget. He goes, "Isn't it wild that a third of these graduates are going to abuse pills or abuse substances?" And
Wow.
it actually, like, it caught me off guard in the moment, and it kind of angered me a little bit, because this was right at the time where I was really questioning if I myself had a problem with alcohol. But I brought that statement to my wife afterwards, and I'm like, "Isn't it insane that he said that?" And she goes, "No, Kyle, that's very, very common. Like, when you have the knowledge of how the compounds and chemicals work, and then in your case, on the detection process front, it's like you're the one that gets the notification that, hey, someone's coming calling, and so get everything in line."
Yep.
So what, you are a Navy corpsman. What did your I guess, like, tenure look like? Were you going overseas on operations? Were you normally stateside? Or how did the drug use translate as you were progressing through your career?
When there wasn't drugs, it was alcohol, and alcohol is acceptable. And so, I mean, in the 9 years, the majority of time was spent operating out. And when you went into a country other than America, you could figure out how to get drugs, but at the same time, the alcohol was just, it was enough. It didn't need to be until the very end, when the addiction was just so immersed into me, and I couldn't deal without having whatever the drug was. That again, it was a progression. It didn't just all happen one day. So
Yeah. And what's the culture of the Navy SEALs like during the time that you served when it comes to drug and alcohol use, specifically alcohol use, because, like you said, it's legal, it's available.
I entered the military in 1979. That was the Carter administration, and within that same year, we elected President Reagan. So Ronald Reagan became the president, and it went from 1975 was Vietnam, and it ended, and the military was in really bad shape. So there was just a lack of the morale just wasn't there.
Sure.
And with there was an incident with it was Iran with the hostages, and then there was an accident in the desert. There were units trying to be sent in to rescue them, and in that moment, it became an embarrassment, and the military really shifted and became what it is today, and that is the Ronald Reagan went from there was no way to find drugs or in the system to zero tolerance, and that was the changeover that made all the difference on how it evolved in time. And I did not get on board with seeing the writing on the wall, thinking that I've been doing this to this point, it's worked. So it was, denial. I lived in a world of denial, and I was able to function for a great many years, but in the end, it took and did to me what it does to everybody.
Yeah. And you had made mention that at your I think you said 9 year and 6 month point, that was actually your second positive test.
Yeah.
what occurred following the first positive, and what, I guess, substance were you flagged for?
Yeah, it was marijuana, and they actually changed my rate. So I went from being a hospital corpsman to an operations specialist, and that was it. There was nothing else. There was no
Okay.
we're going to send you to a program. There was nothing like that. It was that occurred in 1984, 85, and it still wasn't what it has become. And so they just slapped my wrist and sent me on, and in the second time there was not going to be a third time. So
Did in say like in between that first positive test and the second one, with kind of continuing your behavior and staying in the role, was there anyone from the team, or maybe even from your family, that started approaching you and hinting at like, hey, or asking like, Tom, are you doing okay? Do you think that you might have a problem? Were any questions like that floated your way in that time?
yeah, in all of that time, only once, and it was a senior chief, and he called me on the carpet, and I felt betrayed. I felt that he had no right doing that, and in the end, looking back, he was the only one that cared enough to do what he did because he didn't want me to do what I ended up doing, and that
Yep.
was being discharged. So
Yep.
there was one, yes.
How close to your discharge was that call out?
It's still 2 years away.
2 years. Yeah. Um, I kind of had to physically step back there for a moment because I've recently reflected on some key relationships that I've had. And honestly, I feel fairly lucky about the amount of people who had the courage to approach me
Yeah,
about my drinking and my own struggles. But to your point, and what you experienced as well, is exactly what I did. I attempted to destroy those friendships and relationships, and I distanced myself from them. And in looking back, it's like they were the ones who had the courage, the bravery to actually, and the love for me to actually step forward and say something. And I think that's actually, I would look towards you, given your experience. Like, I feel like that's a pretty common trait with addicts, is when faced with that truth and at the point in their journey when they likely have the inability to be honest, like I had, it manifests in attempting to destroy relationships and building resentments.
yeah. You know what? They were actually what we all want, true
Yeah,
friendship.
exactly. But for that struggling addict or alcoholic, it really, I don't want to say it's impossible to hear, but it was one of the hardest things to hear. And just for me, rage built up within
Yeah.
me. Like I can still visualize sitting in a seat when they were talking to me or pressing this on me, and all I felt was defensiveness and rage.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's really difficult when in all reality those are the true friendships. And then one more question pertaining to your time in the SEALs, and going back to a comment you made where you said SEALs are not made, they are born. What do you think about, say, like your mentality or your being, and what I had originally written down was like, what about being a SEAL helped you or hurt you when it came to your addiction and ability to enter into recovery?
It came to serve me in a very large way once I accepted that I was a drug addict, alcoholic, And once that process began, I was discharged 4 months later. I ended up in a 90-day recovery facility.
Okay.
At the end of that 90 days, the physical the physical addiction was broken, but I still had no clue as to how to live life. And the hardest one, especially for men, is to be emotionally available to look at your past, to feel it. I as a former Navy SEAL, was trained to shut off all of the emotions because it's the only way you can do that job. And I would say that to anybody that entered the military. We are all groomed to be able to pull a trigger and take life. And that is done in a way that is layer by layer, quieting any kinds of emotions, so that when you end up discharged from that world and you end up in a different world, and there is no way to do the tools that you had do not have any place in a civil society. And so from that perspective, it was just it was it's still reaching back to remember that time frame was just for me to understand how to have those feelings and those emotions. That's why I ended up working with youth, because I went to see and work with the age group that I was when I began, and came to understand what it is to I watched the various stages, especially in a recovery facility for adolescents, and how their walls were not as concrete as mine were. And in the process of bringing them down and re-educating them, I was able to see for myself how that process was done, and came to understand that the world of spirituality is the world that allows me to understand and be that former Navy SEAL and the licensed clinical social worker, because it isn't about physical. If getting sober is about physical, I had all the tools for that, and it didn't work.
Right.
So for me, it had to be emotional, and in that, it was to be spiritual. And in that transition, in working with those youth, they helped me make that connection. And then the one thing that all Navy SEALs, we go through training, a period of 6 months, and there's a bell. And the easiest thing you can do is to ring that bell, and you're out of there. And the game is, the instructors are looking to put you in a circumstance that will make you give up. And those who don't go on to become former or active SEALs. And it was in that essence. I didn't ring the bell when I became a Navy SEAL. And it was the same circumstance. I'm not going to ring the bell. I'm not going to quit the life of non-drugs and alcohol. And so that served me. Once I was able to see the difference between the physical world and the spiritual world.
Yeah. And what, did you discharge from the Navy and go right into that 90-day rehab?
No. It was 4 months.
Okay.
And at that time, like it is now, there's no recovery facilities. That's a whole different conversation. But it took me 4 months of calling every Monday morning at 8 o'clock to check and see, and that you had to call them. And
so you had the desire, though.
Oh yeah. When I got out, there was nowhere for me to go. The only way I was going home was my parents said, "You can come back here, but you're going to go for help." And as long as I was doing that, I had a roof over my head. And at that stage, I had lost too much. The pain was just too much. And I was able to know that that world and that way of living is not for me anymore, but I had no clue as to how to change it.
Right, right. And were you using during those 4 months, or were you dealing with cravings or urges or any drawback into that world?
Yeah, yeah. It was hell, and I think I relapsed in that 4 month period like three different times in 4 months, which was, I was holding on by the by the seat of my pants and
Yep.
white knuckling
Yep.
and waiting for the day they say, "Come on down."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's telling to me that you use the term hell to describe that time, because I would agree based on my experience. I would have 6 month time periods where I would go sober, and it was largely to prove to other people that I didn't have a problem with alcohol, and to prove to myself. And I figured, to your comment about it not being just a physical, recovery, because in my head I was like, this amount of time is probably a reset when I can then bring and integrate alcohol back into my life. And it never was. And the time periods that I was sober it was hell. I was so irritable and discontent with life, and just continuing to build up and harbor those resentments. And I wasn't doing any real work outside of grinning and bearing it through not drinking.
Yep.
And I'm curious then to hear what was your spiritual journey like? Where would you say, how would you describe your like spiritual state of mind when you were discharged, the day that you were discharged?
There was bankruptcy in all departments. I was not functioning, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. There was nothing at that time. I was in a state of shock and bewilderment, and did not have a clue as to what I was supposed to do. And my saving grace in that moment was I had a family, and
Yeah.
they did love me, but I had worn out the welcome of what I was when I left their house, and to come back could not be but under their rule, my mom and my dad's rules. And because I was so devastated that I was like, all right, you know what, fine. Yeah. So there was it was a blur for the 4 months, and looking back, there wasn't really anything major that I learned in that time other than
Right.
to not use and figure out how, the Jones is horrible. I mean, you're
Yeah.
detoxing and it's just horrible. So
Yeah. Yeah. I've recently kind of reflected back just through conversations with other people about the detox period. And that was a change that I made when I entered into recovery. I make no reference to hangovers. It is entirely a detox, because that's truly what it is. And in an odd way, our culture sort of has a positive spin or connotation to hangover. It's like, hey, if you can, sweat it out, gut through a workout or something like that when you're hungover, like good on you. It's like,
yep.
no, I mean, I literally willed myself to live at the end when I was going through my detoxes. Just genuinely wondering if the breath that I just took was my last breath, if the heartbeat I just had was my last heartbeat, and like not knowing, and just the growing anxiety that built up around it was entirely maddening and hellish, like beyond anything I can even really describe. And it is hard to reflect back on, because I just so like viscerally remember that experience. And yeah, again, I just like I refuse to call it a a hangover anymore. Like I've fully reverted to like your body is detoxing
Yeah.
from this incredibly dangerous but socially accepted chemical.
You're here.
So what did your 90-day program look like once you did find a bed and get in?
Yeah, it was 90 days, 90 meetings in 90 days, and it was an educational, and it was AA, so it was the 12 steps in the big book.
Yep.
And it was the start of finding tools.
Yeah.
I have in time now seen there's other ways to get sober. There are philosophies. The one that says that you can drink in moderation, more power to you. I just denial for me. If I give it any kind of power, I am so powerful in that I can talk myself into believing anything. And
Yep.
if I'm thinking that, oh, you know what, I'll just have one drink, that's not how I am. That's not how my life was. And if that works for you, you know what, good for you. But
Yeah.
it's not for me. In that progression there too, that it's you know what, you, the making of the amends, that there to have 12 steps and to literally have, A, B, C put in front of me, that was a saving grace. I am logical and formal
Yeah.
when it comes to how I am to insert knowledge. I need it in a certain way. And so as long as it's addressing it and dealing in it that way, is I'm open to checking it out and seeing what it does and how it works. The only one that I will not is the one that says that you can do it, in moderation.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm not
Yeah.
speaking for anyone else on that.
Yep. I fully agree with that sentiment. And I'm extremely careful. I will never label or diagnose anyone with or as an alcoholic. I am truly only concerned with myself, but I can say full fact, as an alcoholic, there is no moderation for me. If I allow that insanity of the excuses to go to the first drink to ever enter into my mind again, I'm gone. I think that one of the major changes that I was not expecting that came into play for me is the full-blown absolute belief in that statement. It's like, if I have one drink, and I can visualize this, it is selecting a pathway to an earlier grave than I desire. And I know that. And it's just like, how do I know that? Because I've experienced it. I've taken the break from alcohol, and I can vividly recall the feeling of my first drink and just how it washes over me and how incredible it felt and how it just hijacked my mind. And that is all I can speak to, but it 100%, there is no room for moderation at all. And so like, kind of given your experience in the social work, in my podcast and like talks, I do focus heavily on AA because that is the program that I'm working through, and it is a part of my program. It's not the full thing, but it's really where my knowledge resides. What are some other processes or programs that you have seen work through your work and engagement with others?
I'll answer that, but there's one I want to bring back to you too, because my journey is at 32 years clean and sober, I relapsed.
Okay.
And there was a period of time where I was chipping away, I guess is the way I would justify it. It wasn't drugs and alcohol per se, but it was the Vicodin and the pain pills. And so at 32 years, I relapsed in a way that I shared the very first time, and I've never been suicidal. Even as a clinician, I have dealt with folks that are suicidal. I am comfortable in what is expected of me under those circumstances, but I've never been suicidal until that relapse. And it was eye-opening that I had filtered away from the program, justifying it in a completely different way, and then relapsed and went. What really set it for me was I went and I didn't go back to crystal meth. I went back to the marijuana. And it's legal now. And
Yep.
so for a 3-week period, I got high. And there was nothing good about that high because it isn't the marijuana I smoked when I was first starting out.
Yeah.
It's become something that is just not fun for me. And I had to learn that. And that occurred 5 years ago. And so right now I
Okay.
sit here clean and sober for 5 years, and it's the 5 years that have been truly the best. And in answering that question of what else to find to utilize in the pursuit of going from, if you're an addict, alcoholic, to getting clean and sober, I I found the higher power through a book, and that book wasn't the big book, and it wasn't the Bible. It was a book written by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it wasn't The Lord of the Rings. It's the book called Silmarillion. And he laid out a story that is absolutely beautiful in explaining the one, that is the power that's greatest. It's lesser angels, and it tells stories where I was able to see in that fantasy how to live life honorably. And I don't, what I'm sharing, I don't often give it to anybody, but you asked, and I have said, as long as it's not to drink or do drugs, I'll go and try anything to see if it helps. And that book truly saved my life when it came to understanding a power greater than myself.
So
And
how did you find your way to that book? Did someone recommend it or point you in that direction?
when I first got sober, we were given like an hour a day free. And where the recovery facility was located, a couple blocks away was a bookstore. And in the bookstore, I had a coffee shop. And so everybody goes and, you're replacing drugs and alcohol with caffeine and nicotine.
Yep.
So I went there, and then I also went down into the bookstore and looked into, the religion and the spirituality and all the books that say how to, because I was like, I don't know how to, and I'm going to look. And so I literally sat in front of that bookcase and read everything in the first, 10, 12 years. And it wasn't until I would say 15 years that I came across Silmarillion, and it was just more to escapism. But I didn't realize how he wrote the story, and the story. I'm not gonna give you the surprise. If you want to see what the heck I'm talking about, go buy the book and read it. But understand this: I have now read that book, I would say, 40 or 50 times, and it took a good 10 times before I could figure out what it was saying, how it was saying. All that I know it was that it was saying something, and I had to stick with it and stick with it and stick with it. And finally, I got to understand what was being said, and I have now embraced it in the last 5 years in a way that's kept me happier.
Incredible. And in your journey and your experience, so you said you went to this reading in this book time and time again. Was your progression through like your spiritual journey and your acceptance of a higher power, was it a slow and gradual progression, or did you have like a flash of a moment in your experience?
You know what? Childhood, I was raised Catholic. You know, we went to church, and as long as I can remember, until I left the house, and so I was aware of God. I was aware of Catholicism, and then in the military, I became aware of Islam, Judaism, and I also in that bookshelf found the five great religions and read how there is very little difference between all five of them.
Right.
And in that very little difference is the difference of wanting to kill and justifying murder because this little bit of difference. So again, with that whole thing, the power greater, and through the book, it all became it became real for me. I don't know how to explain it in any other way.
Yeah. I've often said I love having these conversations, and I do genuinely believe they bump up against and into the bounds of our ability to communicate our experience and kind of encapsulate it. And when you venture into discussing the spiritual aspect of it, it's almost a guarantee you're always going to run into this constraint of language, because it's such a unique experience for every single person who has that moment or that progression along, and finally coming to an understanding that it's like they're part of something greater. There is something bigger than them out there. And even using those words like kind of sound childish, but it's like what I mean, it's so meaningful, right? And like when you do talk to another recovered alcoholic or addict who has found the solution, it's like you can kind of start to communicate on like, you're saying something, I get what you're saying, but yeah, it's always so difficult to kind of encapsulate those moments. So in kind of, first of all, I really appreciate you in sharing about your journey and your relapse. You had mentioned it was kind of a slow build up to the relapse. Was there sort of a thought pattern that entered your mind where it's like, I've had enough time, I've got this? Or how did that slow progression kind of get seeded?
Stopped going to meetings. Stopped. There was. I fell away from the program, and I'm a clinical therapist, and I am dealing with in my practice, the vast majority of people have got addiction of some kind that is there, and so being immersed in it, I justified. I was able to say, well, this is the new. The new room that I go into that I can maintain my sobriety by being smarter than, holier than, greater than, BS than, and because you don't hold yourself to that accountability, it just subtly, slowly slides and moves away, and the next thing you know is you're a long way from home.
Yeah, just gradual and slow deviations.
Yeah.
Did you, during that time, did you ever notice any, like concerning aspects about, say, like your emotional stability or changes to your thought pattern as you stepped away from your program and sort of talk to yourself into like, hey, this is the new way that I support my recovery journey?
You know what? What I remember is thinking that, why can't I smoke a joint? You know what? That's not drinking. And I allowed that tape to play. And I allowed it to play until it was in my hand, it was in my mouth, and it was in my lungs. And for the next 3 weeks, I had gone right back to where I was the last day of using, where I was white knuckling I've heard it over and over again. You don't go back to the beginning. You go back to the end.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm here to validate. I went and it went horrible, so much so that I contemplated taking my own life. So that's why this time the program is here. I am embracing it. It is, I had to renegotiate my life in how it is today and what it's going to be until the day I die, because I can't let that happen again, because I might not be as lucky as I was to have it 3 weeks later be able to begin finding my way back into sobriety.
When you were going through those suicidal ideations, do you feel like it was born out of shame, or did you sense that sort of like your options were closing in on you?
You know what? For me, it wasn't shame. It was utter, you know, you look up and you see nothing.
Yeah.
Today I look up just to know that it's there. Okay, I got to go back down and pay attention to here. But at that time, I looked up and there was nothing but horror and pain and anguish. That was what manifested in me beginning the reuse of a substance. So,
during that, did you feel isolated, betrayed, or left behind by your higher power?
No, I don't know that there wasn't. That's a logical. I'm
I'm an
hearing what you're
engineer.
saying there, and it's logical. There
Yep.
was nothing logical to make sense of. It
Yeah.
was truly nothing made sense. There was nothing that could be done that was going to change it for the better, and it was getting worse. So it was you know what? It was a heavy, dark nothingness. That
Yeah.
no joy, no nothing. It was dark, and
Yeah.
it was not logical, and it wasn't going to end good.
Yeah. Thinking about that darkness and lack of joy, my wife and I actually recently went to a concert, and it was an orchestra playing holiday music, and we were sitting there in the audience. And one of the things that I was really taking in, and I have a background in music. I've played various instruments since, like, honestly, the time I can remember. And I sat there in the audience just overjoyed by the fact that I was sensing and feeling something from the music, because one of my main indications that I was lost at the end of my battle with alcoholism was I found no joy in music. I could not get anything from it. I would put songs or albums on that used to give me chills or like compel me into action or a state of mind, and there was, as you said, just nothingness. And it's that nothingness is just like, when there should be something there, is agonizing to live within. So after your 3 weeks, what or how did you pull yourself up?
Got two brothers. They came and grabbed me, and they put it to me simple. They said, if you want to keep using, do not come by, do not come around, do not want to see you. If you want to give up the drugs and the alcohol, we're here for you. And they walked me through the first couple of weeks into the month to the next several months to a year to what we have now is a powerful relationship, but they drew the line. There was no either or. There was no choices. It was A or B. Stay or come home.
And were these blood brothers?
Yep. Biological.
And were you, did you have a close and tight relationship growing up and through your struggles with addiction and into recovery?
The whole family's in recovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it runs in your genetics and in your family.
For us, it did.
Yeah. And do you see that often in your work that you do now? Like, do you ask people to reflect on their own, like family behavior when they're working through like addressing their issues and potential substance use? I'm just kind of wondering, like, is that even helpful to point out when you're working with someone?
This is my belief. This is just me. I believe that every human being has got a secret. It's the secret that's killing them. It kills us all. And those that come to me, that is what is really going on. No matter what you tell me is going on, I know that just got you through the door.
Yeah.
And it isn't. And so with that said, it's I don't need to I have to address it in such a way because nobody wants to say we're going back to childhood. I don't want to talk to my parents. I don't want to talk. But here's the thing: is we were all created by our family or the lack of it. Foster care. You didn't. Your parents were malfunctioning units and they didn't want you. It doesn't matter. This is where it began. And if we're going to find the pattern and the secret, we got to go back. I don't have to live there. I don't have to keep you there. I just need to go back enough times to draw, it's saying 3 points is a straight line. I need 3 points over a period of time that draws a line that you can see the behavior. And once you can see the behavior, we can come to today and say, how's it affecting your life right now? So, nobody wants to talk about childhood. Nobody wants to talk about parents. But I don't know how to I don't know how to help you find joy without going back. It's just, I don't know how.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had made some mention early in our conversation about how kind of that early adolescent stage had an ability to be more emotionally adaptable. And I'm kind of placing words in your mouth a little bit, but could you kind of describe maybe some differences between age groups that you see as they are working to better themselves, whether it is to figure out a substance abuse problem or some other issue that they are dealing with in life?
Yeah, but that attaches to my nonprofit. That rite of passage is the key element here. So that when you're dealing with young folks, it's called Erickson's developmental stages, and we go through these 6, 7, 8 throughout. Depending on how you're looking at it. But the fact of the matter is, it was told to me in education when I was in school that if you miss a developmental stage, you can't go back and put it in, which means you're screwed. So if we can't go back and put it in, I have to come forward and adapt to it. So it's
to that gap,
to the missing pieces, so that it is, it's just,
So one of the things that I was really excited to talk to you about, because quite frankly, in reading through the summary, I found myself kind of like energized to go do this. Could you kind of get into the Honor Bound Academy and we'll start with an overview, and then I'm very curious to dig into like motivations for setting this up and running it and sort of what you've seen from it.
throughout the years of my own recovery and being part of this world and seeing others, I started working with youth. And you know what? I went back to get an education because I didn't want to have a youth ask me a question that I didn't have an answer for.
Mm-hmm.
And so with that said, it just, all of the pieces that goes into making a healthy human being, male or female, it requires so much over the years. And the key piece for me, and because of the help I got from youth, that transition from adolescence to adulthood, that rite of passage, Joseph Campbell spoke of it, saying that what that comes down to is that it's the way of the warrior. Ancient, it's ancient in how societies brought their, especially young men, into being adults. And today, that doesn't exist. The way I see it is today's youth get a swift kick in the shorts and told, good luck, I hope you can figure it out. And they're not given the necessary tools that will help them in addressing this world that we live out in. And that, to me, I believe, is the older generation's responsibility to give back to the younger generation. So that's the book, that's the point. And the reason that age is because of the kindness and the gift they gave me.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Joseph Campbell. I actually was so moved by a quote of his, or writing of his, that I took it from your executive summary and dropped it in here. So if you don't mind, I'm going to actually read it here.
Please.
So, quote, "We have not even to risk the adventure alone, for the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path, and where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. And where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world." And that's from, I don't know if it's a book or just a writing called The Hero's Adventure.
Yep.
So what about that spoke to you in connection with the Honor Bound Academy?
That's everything. Here's the Honor Bound Academy, but look at sobriety.
Yeah.
This is the human dynamic that is required to become a honorable male or female. I mean, it's gender neutral, and to be able to, the demons that our society tells us we must slay are out there. The fact of the matter is, the demon that needs to be slayed is the one within us.
Yes.
I am not going to go kill another. I'm going to kill the demon within me. And in doing so, I see the whole world for what it's worth and what it is. A training ground to become more. And what is more for me? Honorable. That's my journey in taking what you just shared, that so eloquently Joseph Campbell stated, and it's in the book throughout. I looked at special forces and how they train. Everybody's got a training ground. For the Navy, it's BUDS. And in that, I was guided by mentors, instructors, guides that took us from, and never said, wrote it on the board in the morning and then threw you out in the middle of whatever and said, sink or swim. There was nothing that those instructors did not ask of me that they were not capable of doing themselves. And they walked the walk. And so Honor Bound Academy is in this book that I've written. Special Welfare, Social Warfare, Adolescents to Adulthood, a guidebook. What's in there is that transitional of taking the youth that today are probably more intuitive than any other generation to come and are in horrible condition because they're looking at the mentors, the guides, the teachers, the parents, the adults in the society who will not talk with one another, who are angry, who are fearful, and are not willing to compromise in any way, shape, or form. And that's what our youth are looking at. And it's creating mental health huge issues. And so that book that I wrote is telling that story as to what they gave me and why I have educated myself to be all that I can be for them, creating a program that I had in the form of Buds, which was a rite of passage, doing it in exactly the same way, guiding by saying and not by writing it on the board and saying, go do it. And most importantly, in the end, it gives them the understanding of what it is to be honorable. That is the key education that is taught throughout. And the reason I'm sitting here with you having a wonderful conversation, and I am extremely grateful for, is I spent the last decade trying to get funding, and I could not get it funded in the way I needed it to be funded. And I had spent an incredible amount of time, energy, and finances in creating the Honor Bound Academy, this nonprofit. And I did not want it to leave it on the heap pile for history. So I wrote a book and told the story. I told the story of what our youth did for me and in turn what I wish to do for them. I was not able to get the funding, but here's the program. So once you read the front of it is the story of why. And at the back, I put everything in it so that one day maybe one will come along, see the merit of it, and they'll be able to bring it into the real world where I have yet to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I'm not joking when I said I closed my laptop after digging into this program and reading the summary and overview, and the first thing I did was tell my wife I want to do this. Yes. And granted, I am not 18 to 20 years old right now, but I see the power, and having again like the parallels to entering into recovery and drawing back to this statement from Joseph Campbell. It's just like everything is there, and I can see it, and it is, yes, such a critical point. And for the book, are you, when you wrote it, are you targeting parents of teenagers who are soon to become adolescents at this imperative time, or is the book targeted towards the adolescents to offer them a guide for this critical development point in time?
Look, the licensed clinical social worker, that's the clinical piece. Comes before that is the MSW, Masters in Social Work. I have spent the last 35 years at Looking Society becoming what it is today. And this thing that we have today is, we can look back in the past and see where it came from. So I'm telling that story. I'm telling it to a society that says, we have global warming, and everybody here, what are you going to tell your children when you do nothing for the next 15, 20 years? What world are we going to give to our kids? So I'm telling a story for society, but I'm telling it in an adventure story, in a journey story. But the fact of the matter is I'm aiming at society today saying, enough of us. We need to all come together and ask, what is it that we can do for our youth that is feasible, that we don't need? I can give up this for them. We're not having that conversation. And I did not insult you in the book, but I pointed out to say, you're here, I'm here. This is what we did to make it what it is. And this is our kids, what they're seeing and what it's doing to them. And you know what? I'll lay my clinical license on the line. I'm not wrong when I say we're looking at depressions and anxieties. We're looking at suicidal ideation in ways that are horrible, but nobody wants to have that conversation. So in the book, I had that conversation. You read it, you know what? It's a starting point. You want to have a conversation with me? Fine. But don't.
Right.
The end of the book has 500 end notes, because I'm not going to argue with you. I put a notation where I got that information. So if you don't like what I said, go to the source. I'm just bringing up what my education taught me. When you want to create a work that is nonfiction, it has to be done in a certain way. I did it that way. Here it is. Let's talk about it.
So I'm kind of on that note. I'm a parent of a 3-year-old boy who is expressing himself as my wife calls a three-nager every now and again. What you're laying out, I genuinely think about a lot as a parent, and looking at my child, I see, yes, some innocence, but also potential. And this is such a big question, but how do you guide or instruct parents to promote raising children that are prepared and ready for the world that we have created, and to be able to step up and step in and become heroes of their own stories? Are there specific techniques, sort of like perspective that seem to work?
Yeah. You know, Kyle, you have it in you. Every recovering addict and alcoholic has that answer in them. The thing with it, when I talk with parents about their youth, I ask one question, and I only need one question. Do your children know that you love them? If the answer is yes, you pretty much can drop them on their head and it's still going to work out all right. Now, when it wasn't my first job, Child Protective Services, I did not know that existed. I walked in from a family who was dysfunctional because we loved too much. I did not know the dark side of youth that were physically, sexually, emotionally abused, taken from their parents, put out, and are secondary in their beliefs without the ability to understand love. And then I asked that question, I got sober because I understood what love was. I could love myself. But if you don't know what love is, I don't know how to put it there. So I would say to everyone, make sure your kids know that you love them. And when the time comes for all of us to do the right thing, when we put it out there, they'll adapt to it. It will be exactly what they need, because you will have given them love, and we will have given them the circumstances for their future with love. And it is love, bottom line.
That's an incredibly meaningful perspective, because one of the things that I've realized after entering into recovery and having it start with learning how to love myself. Part of my journey is when I went into rehab, I made 2 rules for myself. One of them was every single time I passed a mirror, I had to look into my own eyes, hold that gaze, and say out loud, I love you, because I knew I hated myself so viscerally. And that, in very short order, transformed everything for me. And it's a little bit hard to admit, but I realized that I wasn't fulfilling the full capacity of my ability to love others because of how much disdain and hate I had for myself. And that's incredibly encouraging to hear, and extremely meaningful and powerful. And in all honesty, I can't really think of a better way to close this conversation. And so, Tom, if someone hears this talk and wants to reach out or engage with you or any of the content that you have created, what direction would you point them in?
Yeah, my nonprofit is thehonorboundacademy.org. You put that in, it'll take you to my website that will explain the program, but it'll also share all the rest. And in it, all of the different platforms you can see, going from the honorboundacademy.org, and you can go to my various accounts, Facebook and everywhere, everything. I've created a singularity of a program that I wish for our adolescents, and a story of why I feel that way. What was it that made me think that I could do this? My past brought forward, and a story told for today for all of us, because it's not just our youth that are having issues. The whole country right now, and what is coming is really a darkness that I don't think anybody's really prepared for. So if we're to have that conversation, you and I, you can find me on thehonorboundacademy.org, and I will stand on what I've said. You know what, truth and trust. I'm not asking for you to trust me. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn your trust. That's what I say to youth. That's what I would say to you. I can stand on everything that I say I am is in there. I'm a former Navy SEAL. It can be validated. I'm a recovering addict and alcoholic. I am licensed clinical. I am board certified. And I've been doing this for 45 years to come before you right now and say, it's not too late. Let's make the difference in our young people's lives and give them hope.
Incredible. Tom, thank you so much for your time and the work that you have done and that you continue to do.
Thank you, Kyle. You've been great. Appreciate you.
If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time, all the best.